Part 3. After attacking the first prison camp and freeing the Liberation Army troops imprisoned within, they went after their next prison camp on the next day. They were not riding on the momentum of victory. Rather, there were several reasons why they could not do anything else. The most pressing one was because the food stocks in the prison camps were less than they had estimated. This, in turn, was the result of the twin policies of the demi-humans not feeding their captives enough, and regularly shipping food in from a small city nearby. In addition, the demi-humans who accompanied the food shipments were also responsible for inspecting the prison camps for any abnormalities. Even if they killed all these demi-humans and took all their food, the opposition would definitely conclude that something had gone wrong at the prison camps. Of course, Daldry would learn of that as well. That being the case, it was very likely that he would dispatch a huge force which Nia and the others would not be able to defeat. After standing behind the Saucer King and participating but obviously not speaking in meetings, after a long argument that made Nia's legs hurt to stand on, they had finally arrived at two possible courses of action. The first was to flee to the south after liberating one prison camp and throwing in their lot with the armies that ought to be stationed there. The second was to strike first and conquer the aforementioned small city. While both of these opposed courses of action had their own merits and flaws, they eventually went with the latter, after the captain of the Paladin Order, Remedios, shouted for it. Remedios had a top-secret reason for choosing to assault the city. After questioning the demi-humans and of course, killing them afterwards, the town which was their target apparently contained someone with royal blood in their veins. If they were truly of the royal bloodline, it was very likely that the situation would improve. Even if they were not royalty, it would be a godsend if they were a great noble with a certain degree of status and connections. They could bank on the fact that they had saved his life to ask the southern armies to apply pressure, and possibly ask for reinforcements. However, Nia had her doubts. Your Majesty, do you really think there will be a member of the royal family or a powerful noble there? Nia had been allowed to ride a horse out of deference to the Saucer King's status. Otherwise, the sort of horse which a low-ranking squire like Nia would have been allowed to ride would have been taken for use as a pack animal long ago. I think it's a trap. Even if it isn't, the city will be garrisoned with many troops, and depending on the situation there might be demons present. Captain Custodio ought to be very aware of that. Even so, she has decided to fight an uphill battle like this. Sometimes, you need to wager everything on one bet. If they did not seek the aid of the South, people would begin to starve soon. If that happened, Nia knew that the Liberation Army would not be able to carry on. Soon, they saw their objective, the small city, in the distance. From her horse at the tail end of the column, Nia looked at the militiamen marching ahead of herself. They were citizens of the Holy Kingdom who had been rescued from the prison camps. The reason why the Paladins had pressed them into military service when they should have been resting was because they discovered that there were far more demi-humans in the town than in the earlier prison camps. There were many more weakened people than expected, so they were not expected to make good foot soldiers. Even so, it was better than nothing, and so they were mobilized. Nia's level of skill would be hard pressed to hide such a large force from the eyes of the demi-human scouts, so they need to move as quickly as possible. And the result of doing so was that the people only became more and more exhausted, and the number of adults sitting on cargo wagons only grew. The fact that they could actually sleep on the shaking and rattling wagons only served to show how tired they were. In contrast, the children were cheerfully running along. The priests were probably not used to long journeys on foot either, given how they would look enviously at the cargo wagons from time to time. Even in this state, they're going to be thrown straight into a battle once they arrive. Are they really going to be alright? During their strategy meetings en route, they had decided to immediately attack the city upon reaching it. That was because they lacked both provisions and time. Attacking a city with enemies lying in wait during daytime was extremely dangerous. It would be easier to approach at night, but it would be very disadvantageous to humans, who did not have night vision abilities. In particular, night battles were very dangerous for the citizens, who only had what combat training they had received as conscripts. With that in mind, they had decided to attack during the day. The battle lines had already been formed up, AEAD of them. At their head were the paladins. Behind them were militiamen holding wooden walls they had made after wrecking the prison camps, and at the back were the priests. The plan was the same as last time, using the angels to suppress the enemies on the walls while the paladins broke down the gates. A tactic which relied on brute strength for everything. The citizen soldier's job was largely limited to frightening the enemy through weight of numbers. Therefore, they had ordered the civilians to avoid fighting, and if they had to fight, to gang up on their opponents, among other things. "Now then, show me how you will do this," the Saucer King muttered to himself. As an observer, the Saucer King would not be involved with the battle. While they wanted to draw on his strength for a siege like this, nobody opened their mouth to ask him during their meetings. The Saucer King paid no heed to the pleading gazes directed at him, and he was now positioned in the rear echelon. The battle began like it had the last time. It may have been a small city, but it was very large for the region. Its portcullises were reinforced with iron, and there were murder holes above it. The walls were not built of wood, but stone. The walls and gates were also much better made than those of the prison camps, which had largely been scavenged from materials taken from the villagers. However, because this city had less than 10,000 residents, one could not say it was impregnable. The attackers found it troublesome, while it left the defenders uneasy. That was probably a more appropriate evaluation of the situation. Remedios led the paladins in a charge while the angels attacked the demi-humans on the walls. However, the angels occasionally vanished into motes of light after being hit by enemy attacks. It would seem the demi-humans were the same Bafik they had encountered previously in the camps, but as expected, the ones defending this city were very skilled troops. The most obvious of them was a Bafik on the walls hiding among the battlements and holding a well-made long spear. He had already impaled many angels. That Bafik gave a mighty cry. Perhaps it was some kind of skill, but it did not affect the angels or the paladins breaking down the gates beneath him. Was it because of a narrow area of effect, or was it only effective on allies? The details were unclear. However, it would be good to remember that he possessed some sort of special ability. Looking down, both sides were fighting fiercely outside the gates. The Bafik thrust their long spears from the other side of the portcullis from inside the city at the paladins, who blocked them with spiked shields. Thus, they prevented the enemy from attacking the paladins with the battering rams. Remedios, on the other hand, directly cut apart the long spears they stabbed at her. The demi-humans dumped boiling water on them through the murder holes. However, the paladins already had protection energy fire cast on them in anticipation of this, and so no matter how much water got on them, the paladins were unscathed. Of course, since this was winter, things would be troublesome if they were drenched and then the temperature fell, but it was fine for the moment. If they had used boiling oil instead of water, their swords would have slipped easily from their hands. Perhaps oil was precious to the demi-humans, but they did not make such preparations. The slowly advancing civilians carried the wooden walls which they had brought along to use as shields. While it would have been better if they had been made out of metal, it could not be helped given their lack of proper arms. It might not have been terribly sturdy, but it was better than nothing, and the citizen soldiers hidden behind them began spinning up their slings. They were aiming at the demi-humans fighting with the angels. Of course, since they were not used to combat, the stones they threw struck the angels more often than not. Even though they were taking friendly fire, the angels were resistant to unenchanted attacks, so it was not a problem for them. Of course, it was merely damage reduction and not immunity, but still, the citizen soldiers did not do that much damage to the angels. It was simply because the sling stones would hurt the demi-humans more if they hit them. Every time an angel fell, the priests would summon a new angel and throw it into the fray. While there were very few of them, this inexhaustible and untiring supply of fresh troops kept pouring on, and the demi-human resistance began to falter. After considering the opposition might use defensive magic, they ought to have splashed cold water on them. Combined with the cold of winter, it would make their opponent's body temperature plunge. After all, most people would cast spells to protect against fire. As the Saucer King looked at the battlefield, he muttered to himself, as though he were conducting a calm analysis of the fighting. It was hard to respond to those words. While nobody had died yet, there were those who were already wounded, so she could not bring herself to speak. Speaking of which, is it really all right if you don't participate in the battle, Miss Maruyama? You ought to be able to make a good accounting of yourself with the bow I gave you. Nia was assigned to stand watch by the Saucer King's side. Using her own body as a shield for him was her duty. Therefore, she had not been ordered to fight. However, just like before, the Saucer King seemed very eager for her to use that bow of hers. Does he want me to use the weapon he lent me? I could try taking a shot from here, but missing the first shot with a borrowed weapon would be a little too. Just as Nia was hesitating over how to answer, a mighty noise came from the vicinity of the city gate. Looking over, it would seem the portcullis had been broken down. The noise was a combination of the paladins' rejoicings and the demi-humans' anxious cries. Once the city gate went down, the paladins would flood into the city like an avalanche. After seeing Remedio's superb skills, the shaken beastmen grew more and more frantic. After that, the paladins retreated amidst a great clamor. Nia's keen vision saw within what was inside the narrow aperture of the gates before the paladins had made it there. It was the same as before. A Bafok was clutching a child, even younger than before, and issuing orders to the paladins on the other side of the city gate. While his voice did not carry over to them, one could imagine the orders which had been given. The paladins began falling back, and leading the retreat were Remedios and Gustavo. After that, they told the priests to have the angels fall back, otherwise they'll kill the child. Here we go again. I can't listen in from over here. I want to go over there and take part in their conversation. How about it? You have no need to seek my opinion, Your Majesty. Nia and the Saucer King walked towards Remedios, who was stationed some distance between the Saucer King and the city gates and discussing something under the eyes of the uneasy citizen soldiers. We should negotiate with them, after all, Remedios said, but the one who was frowning after taking off their helmet was someone else. Perhaps it was because they knew what had happened at the first prison camp, but all of them had "How can we approve of this?" written on their faces. Even after the Saucer King came, they still had not found an answer. No, everyone was trying to think of how to talk Remedios down from her position of, in any case, we need to save that child, but that seemed unlikely. After proposing a few vague compromise plans that were ultimately a waste of time, several people exchanged looks, and soon Gustavo raised his voice to shout, "Captain!" as he poured strength into his eyes. We've gone over this countless times already. Even if we had the time, even if we discussed this more, there wouldn't be a way to do it. We can't save that child." After hearing what Gustavo said, Nia knew that the captain had continued the strategy meeting even after the Saucer King had left the command tent. At the same time, she knew that the paladins would not be able to solve this problem without spilling blood. Remedios bit her lip and remained silent. "However, Captain, we can't win this battle without sacrifice. Right now, we ought to sacrifice the few to save the many." Nia saw Remedios' eyes flare crimson at those words. "That is not the kind of war Her Majesty would wage. We are Her Majesty's swords. We serve the Holy Queen, she who wants the people of this nation to live in peace. But the Holy Queen's armor is dead." But before Gustavo could say that, Remedios shouted to interrupt him. "The next Holy King hasn't been appointed yet. Shouldn't we protect the ideals of the Holy Queen's armor to whom we pledged our swords until then? What does a vow of loyalty we made mean, when we break it ourselves?" "Ah, I see." Nia understood. Remedios was bound by the wishes of the person to whom she had pledged her loyalty. Since they were knights of the Holy Queen who loved the people, they could not do anything which would harm the people. The only one who could break her bonds was the next person to whom she offered her loyalty. "Is that wrong? Who did you pledge your swords to? You all went through the ceremony to be ordained as paladins. Who do you think the paladin order serves? When a squire became a paladin, they would meet with the Holy King and ritually offer the sword they held to him. Similarly, when there was a change of Holy King, the paladins would meet with him and offer their swords to the reigning Holy King while swearing their loyalty. Therefore, everyone in this band of paladins had pledged their swords to the Holy Queen. Or did you not?" Quote. Her tone changed in an instant. After heating up, she cooled down right away, and her voice was filled with a freezing chill. "Was the Holy Queen Sama wrong to wish for the small folks' happiness and a nation where nobody would need to cry?" "She wasn't wrong. But, depending on the situation, we might need to change." Who needs to change? Tell me, then. Is there a higher form of justice than not having to sacrifice anyone? Gustavo shut his mouth. Nia realized that she had made a mistake just now. She was not ruled by her loyalty to the will of the Holy Queen whom she had pledged to serve. Remedios said that one ought to carry out justice. However thorny the path, however difficult it was to walk, one ought to trudge through all the difficulties in one's way and continue forward without heed for what was around oneself. Sacrificing the few to save the many, and saving everyone no matter how great or small. Which of these was truly just? That much was obvious. Clearly, it was the latter. However, it was far too idealistic, and a normal person would immediately give up on it. However, even after knowing this, Remedios still insisted on saving everyone. She held firmly to an ideal that a normal person would abandon immediately. That was why she was the captain of the Paladins, the highest-ranked paladin of them all. Remedios was the only one seeking her lofty definition of justice, and those who could not understand this were the pitiful ones. Several paladins lowered their heads in shame. Perhaps they felt the same way. If one considered the Saucer King's justice of killing one to save 1,000 to be a king's justice, then Remedios' justice of 1 or 1,000, they are all the same, was an idealishing form of justice. Both sides were just. Neither was wrong. Even so, is there no justice without strength? For instance, if Remedios was stronger, if she possessed a godlike power which Nia could not imagine, she could save the child, and save the inhabitants of the city. In that case, there would not have been any problems. However, that was not the case. She was stalled here because there was no way to carry on without sacrifice. Carrying out justice requires strength. I want to become strong. That way, I can wipe away Jaldabaoth's taint from this country. Forgive me for interjecting while you are at a deadlock, but you will not reach a conclusion this way. That exceptionally cold voice blew away the building heat in the air. Your Majesty, Captain Custodio, if this goes on, you will only serve to make the enemies know about the effectiveness of hostages. In my view, you will not be able to conquer this city without sacrificing anyone. Certainly not. There ought to be a better way to do this. A way where nobody needs to be sacrificed and where nobody needs to be sad. In response to that voice, which sounded like it was being bled out of her, the Saucer King gave a flat reply. I don't think such a way exists. We've wasted too much time. If this goes on, the past is only going to repeat itself. Remedios bit her lip tightly. A tiny rill of blood flowed down it. Then, Captain, just sacrifice that child. Leave the rest to me. Since so much time has passed, I doubt you will be able to resolve this with a tiny sacrifice, even if you charge in with the will to die. Is that really all right? Quote, it was Nia who could not help crying out. Your Majesty has been conserving his mana to fight Jaldari. Won't using that mana make the fight against Jaldari unfavorable? It is as you say, Ms. Byroha. However, there is no other way in order to save more people. While I cannot possibly guarantee that there will be no losses, at the very least, there will be far fewer than if you try. How about it? Will you leave it to me? So there will still be sacrifices. Unfortunately so, Captain Custodio. Remedios bowed her head and left without a word. She walked toward the city where the citizen soldiers were looking with uneasy eyes. My apologies, Your Majesty. In the captain's place, please allow me, Gustavo, to beseech you to aid us. Umu. Well, it's a pointless question, but you will thank me for it, right? Everyone present was puzzled by the Saucer King's question, but they immediately responded in agreement. Nia did not miss the uneasiness in their hearts over why he had asked such a reasonable question. Really now? Then I will pacify the city by myself. You gentlemen should keep an eye out for any fish that slip the net and kill them or take them prisoner. Personally, I would rather take them captive in order to question them for information. Also, I will be using the undead, so don't get too excited. Saying so, the Saucer King set out for the city gates without waiting for an answer. Greater magic seal, mass hold species. The Saucer King did not stop walking as he cast his spells. After incanting those two spells, he waved a hand and conjured several flickering shadows. There were 10 of them in total. They radiated an aura unique to the undead, one which the living could not abide. Their translucent forms displayed expressions of misery. They were wraiths. Nia had once heard that they would take the shape of the species who saw them from her monster lore lectures. However, the bizarre appearances looked like 3 people's shadows blended together, unlike what the lectures had said. You, high wraiths. The monstrous-looking shadows followed the Saucer King as he walked. The grass by their feet crackled as it withered. Already brown from winter, they shriveled up rapidly as they lost their water content. Go over there and wait for my instructions. The undead moved in perfect unison, unconstrained by gravity, and they floated swiftly into the air. In seconds, the undead melted into the azure sky overhead, and the fact that she could not see them with those eyes of which she was so proud only intensified her shock. While she wondered if it was really all right not to explain in detail to those summoned undead, the Saucer King, who could make such perfect battle plans, would surely not have overlooked that point. Those were high wraiths. Since they are incorporeal beings, they can pass through walls and other obstacles. Of course, they can't pass through things without limit. You probably don't want to know the specifics, do you? Well, they're part of my preparations for taking the city. Now then, please wait here, Ms. Bairaha. Please allow me to accompany you. In that case, please wear this item around your neck. This is. The Saucer King produced a necklace with a 5-pointed star pendant, set with a large carnelian in the center. This item grants immunity to fear. High wraiths have the ability to emanate terror. Let me get this out of the way first. Afterwards, you will be walking into complete chaos. People driven by fear can sometimes show fearsome strength. Even I might not be able to protect you, so if you still wish to follow, please allow me to accompany you. Yuumu. Is that so? I understand. Nia fastened the necklace around her neck. Even so. Good grief, they are at war, you know. How could there be a war without casualties? Nia smiled bitterly in response to the Saucer King's slight jest. Of course, that was not what Remedios had meant. The Saucer King could not possibly have missed the meaning of her words. This was probably the Saucer King's way of cracking a joke, but even so, His Majesty does not seem particularly talented at cracking jokes. Perhaps this might be the Saucer King's sole weakness. Just as that thought came to Nia's mind, they had reached the vicinity of the city gates. Fall back, paladins. I am going to conquer this city now. Move to the rear. I believe you ought to get at least that far back, no? The Saucer King indicated the rearmost paladins and then he walked into the city gates, like he was strolling into an empty field. Get back. If you don't move quickly, this brat will. Soon enough, the Saucer King ran into the Bafik who was holding the child hostage. It was hard to tell what kind of expression the demi-human was making. It was probably shock. The other demi-humans around the Bafik probably had the same looks on their faces. No, even Nia would be shocked if she suddenly saw the Saucer King. The undead. With that, the word undead rippled through the demi-human ranks. Indeed. I believe they are called the living. I heard it once, but I do not quite trust my recollection. What? Why are you? What on earth? Are you really? No, a human. The barfolk's eyes turned to Nia. You control that undead creature, right? What a creepy guy he is. Thoughts like, I'm not a necromancer, or you're being rude to the Saucer King, ran through Nia's mind, but she remained silent. Sorry to intrude while you're in chaos, but get back, undead, or else this kid gets it. The Bafik tightened his grip around the boy's throat. All signs of life fled the boy's face. His glazed-over eyes reflected the Saucer King's visage, but he did not react. Even so, he still gasped softly when his captor grabbed his throat. Fuha. You're actually trying to use the living as a hostage against me, one of the undead. My. The barfolk's eyes went wide. His expression's kind of disgusting, and Nia mused that the reason she had the room to calmly think like this because she was backed by the mountain that was the Saucer King. Human. Call this undead off. It's not like I'm controlling him. Now then, shall we begin? What? Stay back. Get back right now. Perhaps it had sensed something, but the Bafik took a step to the rear while still holding its hostage. When she looked around closely, she could see the forms of other children. Had they been brought here as hostages as well? Even so, they did not seem to want to kill their hostages to teach him a lesson. They probably thought, would living hostages really work on the undead, who were the enemy of the living? Nia sensed something like a black wind curling past her. In that moment, all the Bafik froze in place. Ever since the Saucer King had shown up, everyone present had remained still, studying him so as not to miss a single move he made, but this change was far too extreme. Their eyes and mouths gaped open, and their faces twisted in an ugly manner. Also, it was not just the Bafik. Even the near-lifeless children showed a dramatic response to this. While she could not read the demi-humans' faces, Nia understood human expressions. Fear was written on the children's faces. It was an absolute, unimaginable, and overpowering fear. The Bafik screamed in a strange way. HMPH. Release. Mass hold species. A magic circle appeared, and some kind of spell flew forth from the Saucer King. In the next moment, the numerous demi-humans and their child hostages froze in place like hideous statues, their faces still twisted. However, they did not look like they were dead. She could hear the faint sounds of breathing, quite ragged, it would seem. And then, above them, countless cries rang out from near the city wall. After that, the thump sounds of meat being bludgeoned came from behind Nia. "All right, let's go." She was briefly distracted by that sound, so when she looked forward again, at the portcullis. Greater break item. A shrill noise rang out. It was the sound of the pieces of pulverized gate falling like rain. As I thought, destroying buildings with this drains a lot of mana. Although I didn't use it like that over there. I guess all I can do is accept the fact that I need to pick my targets for better effect. You can't look down on small things, after all. The Saucer King muttered to himself as he walked over the hill of the gate's debris and passed through the city gate, with nobody to block his path. The rapidly changing situation left Nia confused and unable to move. Once she regained her calm, she smiled to herself. The Saucer King had destroyed in seconds the portcullis which the paladins had worked so hard to just dent. The strong really are unfair. Nia jogged after the Saucer King, and he turned around in front of the immobile Bafik. "So, how about them?" he said, while indicating the motionless demi-humans and the children they were holding. "It's only temporary, you know. Go tie up everyone here. Then I'll call the paladins over. That would be a great help. Unfortunately, I am still radiating a fear aura. Everyone who steps into it will be terrified. Therefore, please ask them to take the appropriate measures. I believe priests ought to have lion's heart, while paladins have. Ask them to use under divine flag. How about that? You actually knew about that." The Saucer King chuckled, and then walked through the Bafik, as if to fill the gaps between them. Goo. A strong-looking Bafik fell from above with a growl, holding a spear. It had probably jumped down from the city wall. Its eyes were red and he was foaming at the mouth. It was clearly not in a normal state of mind. It looked like he had gone mad. I see. Savagery. No, berserking. Certainly, that would negate fear and other mental effects. Oops. The Saucer King skillfully evaded the stabbing spear. It was a crisp, efficient movement, one unique to trained individuals. However, the Saucer King's evasion meant that a Bafik who had become a statue ended up being stabbed by its compatriot's spear instead. The spear pierced straight through its body, and it collapsed to the ground, spraying blood everywhere. The berserk Bafik no longer seemed able to tell friend from foe. "Give me a break." The Bafik raised its spear. Was he going to sweep with it? However, Nia could not launch an arrow. The Saucer King approached the Bafik, like he wanted to block her shot. Certainly, it was wise to close the distance given the spear's length. However, the Saucer King's next move deviated from common sense. With a swift movement, he pressed down on the Bafik's head from left and right. Perhaps it was because the Saucer King was surprisingly strong, but the Bafik could not escape the Saucer King's grasp no matter how it thrashed. Having given up on that, the Bafik thought of something else. It gripped the front portion of the spear and drove it through the Saucer King. No, to be precise, it looked to Nia like it had driven the spear through him. However, the Saucer King did not flinch. Perhaps a defensive spell had stopped it. You're not like that troll, after all. With a sickening squitch, the barfolk's eyes popped out of its skull. This was clearly a lethal injury. No, one could say that this was even worse than a fatal wound. The Saucer King let go, and the Baffic collapsed on the ground. Its limbs twitched around on the ground, but it was hard to say that those movements were consciously driven. May I know what you did?" Nia nervously asked from behind, and the Saucer King dusted his hands off as he nonchalantly replied, "I crushed its skull. Sometimes, berserk individuals don't go down even when they're fatally injured. Still, if you destroy the brain, it should be fine. Still, it really was weak. Barely harder than an eggshell. Are you kidding me?" Nia's face twitched. His Majesty really doesn't have any gift for making jokes. "All right, Ms. Byroha, call the paladins. Tell them to secure this area so we can continue forward together." "Yes." Nia ran back outside at top speed, to where the paladins were. When she looked there, she saw several Baffic lying at the paladins' feet. Since they could not have run out from the gate, they had probably been Baffic who, in their attempt to flee the Saucer King, who was the source of their fear, had chosen to jump off the walls, and this was the result. After reaching the paladins, Nia hurriedly relayed the Saucer King's instructions. After that, she rushed back at top speed to the Saucer King's side. After Nia returned, the Saucer King said, "Then let's go," and entered the city streets. The question of why no new Baffic had come after the city gates had been breached immediately faded away. Nia heard groan after groan. It made her think that this unliving city was moaning. This is. I ordered the undead I released to spread fear. This is the result. Some hostages might have been trampled in the confusion. Well, all you can do is treat it as a sad accident. Give up on them." She cast her eyes outward, and a horde of Baffic was running towards them, with desperate, probably looks on their faces. They looked just like hairy prey animals, and Nia even found them a little pitiful. They must have been exposed to extraordinary fear. Otherwise, why would they run towards a being who was even more powerful than the undead creature from which they were fleeing? No signs of humans then. In that case, maximize wide and magic fireball. The Saucer King discharged a fireball into the center of the Baffic horde, and it erupted into a massive blaze. After that, vanished demi-human bodies rained down everywhere. While waiting here might be the best thing to do. The enemy seems to have a leader. He's waiting in a plaza near the center of the city, and he's resisted the fear of the high wraiths, so let's move on. What do you think? I believe all will go well if we do as your Majesty wishes. Really now? Then let's go. Every time they took a step forward, soul-chilling cries seemed to echo from everywhere, as though a great massacre was taking place. Also, due to the demi-humans' lack of hygiene, their raw waste, feces, and urine were everywhere, which made Nia wrinkle her nose. Speaking of which, Ms. Byroha, what should be done about those? She looked in the direction where the Saucer King was pointing at. There were a group of naked human beings there. Regardless of gender, their hands had been nailed to wooden stakes that had been driven into the ground. In their efforts to flee their fear, they had struggled violently, and their arms were coated with fresh blood. In all likelihood, those were probably fences made out of human beings. They were exhausted, bone-thin, but their lives did not seem to be in danger. She had attacked this city in order to free the people. Even if she continued following the Saucer King, Nia would not be of any use. In that case, helping them now and taking them to a safe place was the right thing to do. However, there was one thing which made her uneasy. What should she do if the people were attacked by demi-humans while they were evacuating? What a joke. What am I hesitating for? The captain would have chosen to help him without any hesitation. And the reason why I can't is it because of strength? After all, you're confused? Then, just leave them be for now. There shouldn't be any demi-humans nearby. Leaving them here should be safer. Let's go. Yes. While she still had her doubts, Nia continued following the Saucer King to the city's plaza. Why was it that the Saucer King could advance without the slightest delay? Though she had her doubts, she convinced herself by saying, "He must have cast a spell." Soon, the two of them came to a plaza which looked like a market with streets everywhere. As I thought, there was no way this could have been resolved without sacrificing people. She followed the Saucer King's eyes, and there were human corpses mixed with demi-human corpses. They were probably people who had been trampled to death in the fear-induced chaos. It can't be helped. While the Saucer King was joking, attacking the city by brute force would probably have caused a matching number of casualties. Going by that, letting the Saucer King use his overwhelming might to conquer the city minimized the number of lives that were lost. The Saucer King shrugged silently, and then he indicated the center of the plaza with his chin. There was a demi-human there who was larger than all his peers. His curled horns resembled those of a mountain goat, and he was covered in silver fur. His excellent physique clearly showed that he was not an average demi-human. The tips of his horns were encased in a shell of gold which was socketed with jewels, and he wore a green breastplate that had turtle shell patterns on it. He wore a reddish-brown cape made from worked animal hide. His left hand held a large shield with a topaz socketed into it, while his right hand held a bastard sword whose blade was light yellow. His panoply vividly illustrated the courage and ferocity of a gallant warrior. He was the most fearsome and well-trained of the demi-humans. He was probably a lord or some kind of similarly ranked special being. If Nia were alone, she would have fled this opponent with all her might. Wonderful. I wonder which one of your items stopped the fear. The Saucer King's delighted words referred to the magic items adorning the demi-human. He had rings on both hands and jewelry hanging from his neck that covered his entire chest. There were things dangling from both sides of its waist, things which might have been a set of 3 human baby skulls strung together. The green-eyed demi-human studied the Saucer King as he approached, and then his gaze shifted to Nia. A newly appeared undead. And is that a necromancer in the back? The demi-human obscured itself behind its large shield, as though wary of a gaze attack like the kind a Medusa would launch. Not bad. You managed to push this city, my tribe, to this point. You, who controls the enemy of all life, the user of fearsome magic. State your name. The Bafik pointed his sword at Nia. No, wait, hang on. You've gotten it wrong. It's not me. What? She looked to the Saucer King for help, and he folded his arms and looked to Nia. So you do understand. That's right, it's her. She's my master. No, no. Wait, Your Majesty. What on earth was he saying? Truly, he had no talent for making jokes at all. As he saw how Nia flapped her hands around in panic, the Saucer King chuckled. Feeling better now. It was just a dumb joke. Flaring his cape with the regal motions of a king, the Saucer King turned to regard the demi-human before him. I am the entity who set the undead upon you. I am the undying king who rules a country to the northeast, the rule of the Sorceress Kingdom, the Saucer King Ainzu. And what is your name? My name is Bussa, the Grand King Bussa. Oh Saucer King, how about the woman by your side? She is my follower. Well then, what do you want to do? Would you rather be killed by me? Or kneel in servitude? Choose as you wish. With my name as Lord at stake, kneeling once in subservience will be enough. Bussa raised his shield and advanced, raising his sword into a horizontal position. He looked like a goat about to charge. Then I shall play with you for a while. Ms. Bairoha, you just sit back and watch. Speaking of which, goat, you're equipped with all kinds of magic items, but I detect no magic from that thing at your waist. Is that some kind of special item? Fuha. It's the latest fashion. They're just bones. That does remind me of my subordinates. Nia shuddered from behind as she heard that. So he has such subordinates. They're well-shaped, no. They're the best this city has to offer. I see. I understand. I sympathize with your feelings. It seems this fashion thing is quite important. The maids have taught me that very well. All right, let's begin. Create greater item. After casting his spell, a jet black sword appeared in the Saucer King's hand. Why is His Majesty using a weapon? The Saucer King should have been an arcane magic caster, and a top-rate one to boot. In that case, weapons were to be used only after he ran out of mana and options. Arcane magic casters knew that well, which was why they did not touch any weapons. The Saucer King must have chosen to fight with a sword for some reason. Could it be that he's expended a great deal of mana? That would be bad. His Majesty came here to do battle with Jaldari. After the repeated casts of Fireball, the spell, which had immobilized a large group of the enemy, and then his mass summonings of the undead, she could understand if his mana had been heavily depleted. The spell to summon those undead must have been of quite a high tier. While she did not know how powerful high wraiths are, they were most definitely stronger than wraiths. Therefore, summoning so many high wraiths would have required a great deal of power. Under normal circumstances, every time a priest cast a spell to summon angels, he would only be able to summon one at once. If they were willing to summon weaker angels, they could call forth multiple entities. By that logic, he must have used a very high-tier spell, possibly an unimaginably potent spell of the 6th tier. The 6th tier. Nia gulped. The 6th tier was a realm where none had explored before. According to legend, the Holy Queen could use spells of the 4th tier. This was 2 tiers above her. It might have been a realm beyond common knowledge, but the Saucer King might have been able to make it a reality. Maybe, if he used a 6th tier spell for his summons, I could understand how he used a vast quantity of mana. But in that case, wouldn't it be better for me to help the Saucer King? Nia looked at the Saucer King's back as he squared off against the demi-human. The demi-human she could see over the Saucer King's shoulder was very strong, and no amount of Nias would help against him. However, the Saucer King carried himself with a sovereign's forthright bearing, with no sign that he was picking a fight he could not win. Could it be that His Majesty is a magic swordsman-type arcane magic caster? There were benefits and drawbacks to improving one's swordsmanship and spell casting at the same time. The benefits included being able to use many fighting methods, but the drawbacks were that one would be mediocre in both fields. In that case, what was the Saucer King like? The two of them studied each other, and then they slowly began to move. They closed the gap between them, until they were in melee range. Buster launched the first strike. Shield bash. It was a sudden charge, made with a shield held in front of himself. And the Saucer King took it head-on with his sword. As expected, there was no way to take the force of that massive body as it suddenly charged forward. The Saucer King was sent flying. No, his feet were still firmly planted on the ground when he landed, so that did not quite fit. Rather, he had been knocked back. While the fact that the Saucer King, who could crush a barfolk's skull with his bare hands, had been knocked back was quite surprising. Surely a body of bones would not be able to completely defend against that attack. From what Nia knew, there was an advanced martial art called Fortress that could completely nullify the force of an impact, but that was a technique only a veteran warrior could use. The two of them stepped forward, and their swords collided with each other. Their back and forth was too fast for Nia's eyes to follow. The only things she could clearly see were the brief moments when their blades hit each other and froze in place. If Nia joined this battle, she would surely be hacked to death. Steel clashed with steel at high speeds, and the ear-piercing sound of metal echoed all around. Both of them had equivalent arm strength, so when they crossed blades, their attacks and defenses took place simultaneously. Should she be impressed by how Buster could swing such a heavy blade with one hand, or show respect to the Saucer King for wielding a two-handed sword while being a magic caster? This was a super high-level battle of the sort she had never seen before, and Nia was certain that she could not possibly interfere. In order not to get in the way of their fight, Nia slowly shifted behind a piece of cover and hid herself. They're swinging at each other like that, but neither of them is hurt. Speaking of which, the Saucer King seems a little too strong. Nia's brain could no longer keep up with a magic caster who could fight with a sword to this extent. Did he use some kind of amazing spell? All Nia could do was attribute it to some form of incredibly magic she had never heard of before. Even so, if this keeps up, there's no doubt that the Saucer King will win. No, was he planning to draw out the battle because of that? The undead did not feel fatigue and they would not be shaken in combat. All of these were unfavorable to Buster. Buster seemed to realize this because his face started to contort. If he has some sort of trump card. Nia was shocked. The Saucer King had suddenly thrown his huge sword at Buster. After that, a hemisphere of light appeared around Buster and blocked the thrown sword. The bubble of light vanished, and the thrown sword had only slightly scratched Buster. This is bad. Nia prepared to rush out from behind her cover. The Saucer King was unarmed now. Huh? At some point, a jet-black halberd had ended up in the Saucer King's hands. Buster must have felt the same way as Nia. His eyes were as wide as saucers. You didn't incant a spell, how did you do it? And where did that sword you threw go to? I simply cast a silent spell. Don't worry about it. All right, my subordinate taught me this, but I'm not very confident in my skills. I apologize in advance if I end up fumbling around. The Saucer King readied his halberd. He radiated a strange sense of oppression. Warriors often favored weapons within the same broad classes. Swords, axes, maces, that sort of thing. The Saucer King used momentum to swing his halberd. He attacked Buse's feet, which were hard to defend with a sweeping motion. This was a technique one could only perform with a long-shafted weapon. Just as Buster brought his sword low to try and block the attack, the halberd suddenly jumped up. It was a feint. This was a move that would require considerable arm strength to perform, but Buster raised his sword to block it in an instant. As expected, the Saucer King favored the sword, and he did not seem very skilled with the halberd. While he could elegantly execute textbook attacks, there seemed to be something strangely off about his attacks, and even Nia could spot it with her eyes. After blocking the halberd's momentum, Buster leapt back. Sandstorm. The sand particles from within the sword spread out like a wall, rushing towards the Saucer King. It had probably obscured the Saucer King's vision completely. While she doubted if the Saucer King had eyeballs, having one's vision completely obscured blocked was a tremendous disadvantage. Essence Seal. Grand Power Strike. One was a martial art Nia had not heard of before, while the other was an advanced technique, a powerful strike that would inflict additional damage. After using both of them, Buster charged out, faster than before. Buse's horn decorations glowed with a bizarre light, and he looked like a shooting star. Yacht. HMPH. The Saucer King caught the blow on his halberd. Ha! And Buster laughed. The sound of metal being ground away rang forth. Nia's eyes went wide. Could it be a sunder attack? Sunder attacks directly damaged a foe's weapons, but the amount of damage done was greatly affected by the composition of both weapons and their damage potential. Buser's martial arts were probably intended to strengthen these two attributes. Nia began to panic, but in the next moment, she froze as she saw Buster staring with wide eyes. "It's unharmed," Buster cried out in shock. "What the hell is that weapon?" As Buster scrambled back, his expression completely changed, and with no intention of pressing the attack, the Saucer King spun his halberd, tracing a beautiful arc in the air. "Well, I did make this weapon with my magic, you know. How could it be so easily broken? But weapons made by magic are fragile, right? Oh, it seems you've had experience fighting opponents with magically created weapons, but it's dangerous to be bound by such a fixed worldview, no? In other words, there might be opponents who can make weapons which you can't break." The Saucer King let go of his halberd. The halberd then vanished, as though it had melted into the air. The same thing must have happened with the great sword from just now. After that, the Saucer King made a grasping motion, and now he had a black long sword in each of his hands. "Now then, what will you do? Don't tell me that attack was your winning strategy. Can you help me gain more experience?" The Saucer King took a step forward, shortening the distance between them. "If you've got any more trump cards, it'd be better if you hurried up and used them. No, I'm not kind enough to let a useless enemy live." "Foo, foo. What are you saying, undead one? Indeed, I'm very impressed by how you managed to fully defend against my attack. Very well done. However, wasn't that because you were focused on defense? I know you won't get tired, so you feel that you can beat me if you grind me down." He saw through it. Nia felt nervous again. Even she had noticed it. Buster, a far better warrior than herself, could not have failed to notice that. "I see. So that was what you thought. Indeed, you would be correct to think so. But unfortunately, that was not the case." The Saucer King spread his arms and approached. The swords in his hands vanished like smoke. "Watch." Buster had already stabbed that unprotected body faster than Nia could shout. And then, "What?" Buster frantically, repeatedly swung his sword. Why, what is this?" he shouted with every swing he took. That was because the Saucer King was unharmed despite taking every blow. In that case, Buster braced his shield and used a martial art. Yet, the Saucer King remained unmoved despite taking a shield bash. Instead, it was Buster who stumbled back. Why? Humans had a hard time reading demi-human expressions, but right now it was very easy. His face now showed terror and despair. "Martial arts are an unknown technique to me. Did martial arts derive from skills, or are they a warrior's magic? Even until now, I still don't know. Still, don't you feel that when fighting an opponent of equal ability, victory might be decided by experience and knowledge of martial arts? That's why I will take your attacks head-on. However, you've shown them all to me, haven't you?" The Saucer King shrugged in an exaggerated fashion, and at the same time he plucked one of the 9 rings he wore from its finger. He did nothing else. That was the only move the Saucer King had made. However, a wave of unnaturally frightening and cold air filled the surroundings. Nia hurriedly looked to the sky. She had almost thought that the sun in the sky had frozen and shattered. However, the sun was still there, shedding its radiance. Then could this frigid and jet-black emanation be something released by the Saucer King? Could a single individual do something like this? This is the Saucer King. This is the true form of the magic caster who slew an army of tens of thousands. and now it seems there is no longer any need to fight you." He stepped leisurely towards Buster. Buster, on the other hand, took a trembling step back. It was like he was being pushed away by an invisible pressure radiating from the Saucer King. Buster could feel that abnormal presence more keenly than Nia. He clearly understood the fact that the Saucer King was not an opponent he could fight. The way his fur stood on end proved that. "Wait, hang on. No, wait a second. I'm begging you, just wait a bit." Buster raised his right hand and let the sword he was holding fall to the ground. Surrender. I surrender. I have news about Jaldari. How about it? That should be very useful, right? It'll definitely be useful. I see. Also, there's more. You want to fight Jaldari, right? I'm much stronger than human beings. I can arrange to bring my tribe along to help you fight Jaldari, that piece of shit Jaldari. We'll go in first. How about that? Oh, wait, please wait. That's not all. If you want, I can give you all of my collected treasure. That ought to be enough for my life, right? Is that all? Are you done making your pitch? Oh, wah, eh. Buster frantically looked around, and then looked at the Saucer King once more. Yes. No, that's not it. I have more, much more besides that. I can help you get whatever you want. No. I'll definitely get it for you. Really. Please believe me. What I really want is something you will never be able to obtain. Nia sensed the irritation in the Saucer King's tone. Naturally, Buster, as the one confronting him, must have felt it even more strongly. Wait a minute. Seriously, wait a bit. Or, hey. He was laughing like a servile minion. The kingly attitude he had demonstrated when he had faced him at the plaza was nowhere to be seen. I'm sorry if I said the wrong thing. No, I apologize. Really. It was my fault. Really. Then, how about it? This one can be useful to you. How stupid I was to make an enemy of the great undead king. Therefore, if you would give me a chance to make up for that mistake, I would. You won't regret it. Buster got on both knees and clasped his hands as he begging for mercy. What a pathetic pose that was. Yet Nia did not think that way at all. No, she had already accepted that this was the proper action an enemy ought to be taking when faced with the true form of the Saucer King. At the same time, she vividly recalled the words of that Naga they had met in the Sorceress Kingdom. A wise man would immediately throw himself at his feet and beg for mercy. In that case, the fate of those who did not kneel right away was. I see. Well, I like those who understand they were wrong and work hard to correct their mistakes. That means. Buser's face lit up with joy. However, that joy was snatched away in an instant. However, if I let you become one of my subordinates, Pestonia and Negredo would not be happy. Also, be at ease. I will not do anything wasteful like only using the skull. I'll make full use of every part of you. Now die, the Saucer King said as he erected a slender finger bone. No. I don't want to die. Wait. I'm begging you. Please, I'm begging you. I still have some value. I'm useful enough to make you happy. Really. Believe me. All things which live must die. The difference is in how soon or late they meet their fate. No. Don't look at me that way. Don't kill me. Buster rose to his feet, then turned around and ran. Nia stared, dumbfounded at how fast a living creature could run when its demise was at hand. However, the Saucer King's spell was faster still. How boring. Death. Nothing happened. There was no big explosion, no cataract of roaring lightning. Buster simply fell to his knees and keeled over. That was all. Well, it's a shame about the information. Well, that's how it is. Do you object, Ms. Bairuha? No, not at all. Your Majesty's decisions are flawless. Really? Well then, go find the paladins. Tell them I've taken care of the demi-humans leader. Although, this is kind of bad.